What's the strangest thing about Logan's skeleton? What new anatomical details of Wolverine did Deadpool 3 clearly show us? Why was Poole able to dismantle his legendary indestructible skeleton so easily? And what's wrong with his rib after all? The answers to these and other curious questions about our old friend Wolverine in today's video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and support the video with your activity. This is very important to me. Yes, in today's video, we'll be looking for new anatomical details in Logan's structure, in scenes that were created purely for dark humor and opening credits. In other words, they don't carry even a hint of serious subtext. But when has that ever stopped us? Besides, there are still some details worth noting. We've already discussed Old Man Logan's anatomy on this channel more than once, so as we take a closer look at his skeleton, we'll also be answering some questions we've raised in previous videos like this one. Remember when we talked about how different movie adaptations from different directors showed fundamentally different approaches to implanting adamantium into James Howlett's body? In the first X-Men films, it was a thin layer of metal coating Logan's bones. In later films, it was more of a symbiosis between the skeleton and adamantium at a molecular level. In other words, the creation of a unified adamantium skeletal mass. Let's call it that. So what approach to combining the skeleton and adamantium does Deadpool 3 introduce? In reality, it's a mix of both methods, and more. In these frames, we can clearly see that a thin layer of adamantium covers James's skeleton from the outside, but inside, his bones remain the same. Take a look at the eye socket. In the scene where Poole rips out his fake rib, we see skeletal elements that appear to be a fusion of bone and adamantium on the same molecular level. But to be more precise, it seems that this part of the skeleton, specifically the rib cage, is a complete replacement of organic bone with adamantium components. Similar to what happened with Logan's claws in the first films when his organic claws were completely replaced with adamantium versions. But personally, I prefer the theory that there were never any biological claws in the first place. Again, based on the early films. Moreover, when Poole rips out Wolverine's fake rib, why was he able to do it so easily? On one hand, it's attached to the costal cartilage, where there's no skeletal reinforcement at all. On the other hand, it's fastened to the rest of the rib cage with a screw. So it gives the impression that Logan's rib cage was assembled by Stryker's engineers like a construction set. And most importantly, at that time, they still didn't have a clear, refined methodology for creating his indestructible skeleton. They only had a goal. So, if this isn't just a movie mistake, then what kind of bizarre tactic is this for creating an indestructible skeleton, where the engineers couldn't even decide which technical approach to take? Does any of this make sense? Actually, it does. Again, if we look back at the adamantium infusion procedures from the first films through Logan's memories, nightmares, and X-ray scans, it becomes clear that the engineers, when they started working on Logan, had no clear understanding of how exactly to integrate adamantium with organic tissue. They were figuring it out as they went, and everything they did to Logan, in the long run, seems far from practical. We'll come back to this point later. Looking at these X-rays, we can see that Stryker and his engineers experimented with different ways of attaching skeletal elements in Logan's body. And what we see on those X-rays and what we actually see in reality don't quite match. Now, you could nitpick and say, these are just different movie adaptations, so there's no point in trying to find consistency here. Fair enough. But then we have the famous Lady Deathstrike, whose anatomy within the same film is presented using two radically different approaches. The structure of her arms on the X-ray images, including her claws, doesn't match the actual mechanics of how they work. In reality, she doesn't extend her claws from her forearms like Wolverine does, but rather from her fingers, using a telescopic mechanism. So Yuriko went through a series of procedures to enhance her anatomy with adamantium, during which Stryker modified and perfected her. The same applies to Logan, but with the caveat that Yuriko's anatomy is far more refined. Meanwhile, Stryker mostly used Logan as a test subject for early experiments in adamantium organic symbiosis, on him and a few other test subjects. So in a way, Wolverine's skeleton is like Frankenstein's monster, a far from perfect Frankenstein's monster. It combines different methods of adamantium integration, such as a thin layer of metal coating the bones from the outside, and the complete replacement of certain skeletal parts with adamantium equivalents. Stryker, more than anyone, knew how to suppress mutant abilities, so pulling this off within Logan's physiology was well within his capabilities. And while we're still on the topic of Logan's ribcage, let's take a look at one of the main anatomical problems caused by adamantium. A ribcage cage covered in metal, of course, loses its flexibility, which is crucial for the proper function of the diaphragm and lungs. And when we first saw Logan's exhumed skeleton, the first thing that caught our attention was the synthetic ligament replacements, apparently infused with some amount of adamantium. Which honestly makes sense, since they are the key to solving the crucial issue of joint durability. For Stryker, judging by the x-rays, this was one of the most difficult challenges. To address it, he used an approach that in modern medicine is referred to as ligamentoplasty or ligament reconstruction. In other words, damaged ligaments were reinforced or replaced with synthetic equivalents. Naturally, they had to be elastic. And in Logan's case, they were so elastic that Poole was able to use them to decapitate a poor guy. And considering that Stryker's engineers had found ways to fully replace certain parts of James's body, his original biological ligaments could have been completely removed. And take a look at how in some areas, the number of synthetic ligaments greatly exceeds the biological ones. This is especially true for the elbow and knee joints. Logan's ligaments in these areas are incredibly durable, but at some point, it seems like Stryker's engineering team just got fed up with spending hours reconstructing every single joint. They simply had enough of it, because the most injury-prone joint in the human body, the shoulder, wasn't given nearly as much reinforcement. The same applies to the hip segment. The ligaments in the sternum area are completely missing, even though they should be there. And there's no additional reinforcement in the feet either, meaning that Logan's skeleton was never truly designed to be absolutely indestructible. For a strong enough opponent, ripping off his hands, feet, or even tearing apart his ribcage wouldn't be that much of a challenge. And by the way, the reason why artificial ligaments are missing in certain areas or are barely present in the wrists might actually be pretty logical. After all, Wolverine's claws, when extending, tear through everything in their path. Muscles, bones, ligaments, tendons, you name it. And synthetic ligaments, unlike biological ones, don't regenerate. So if they were there, they wouldn't have lasted long. But Stryker's engineers paid a lot of attention to Logan's spine. Not only is it reinforced with an internal longitudinal ligament, its synthetic equivalent, but it also has artificial replacements for the intervertebral discs, which of course enhances its stability. And in these very frames, we see the main reason why Poole was able to destroy Wolverine's so-called indestructible skeleton with ease. Yes, his synthetic ligaments in some places had already lost their fixation to the skeleton. And this didn't just start happening after his physical death. I'd bet this problem had already shown up in the battered Wolverine from the 2017 film. The thing is, artificial ligaments, as a rule, attach to the particular bone elements, and in Logan's case, they are attached to his organic bones, with a thin layer of adamantium coating them from the outside, further reinforcing the connection. But even so, this reinforcement, combined with Logan's rapid healing ability, worked effectively. And in a way, it did make his skeleton relatively indestructible. But let's be honest, if Magneto had ever wanted to tear him apart, he absolutely could have. James' adamantium skeleton, in the long run, only promised him an incredible amount of pain. I mean, let's be real. After getting this skeleton, neither he nor his abilities could function properly. This skeleton is one giant anatomical inconsistency, complete isolation of bone marrow, which, by the way, plays a huge role in his abilities, complete isolation of blood vessels, total inability of cartilage and other joint elements to function normally, and much, much more. And analyzing everything shown in the films, for Stryker, James was just a test subject to identify mistakes that shouldn't be repeated in the creation of new super soldiers. Lady Deathstrike's skeleton, on the other hand, was reinforced using a much simpler yet more effective method by implanting adamantium rods along the skeleton that didn't interfere with normal bodily functions. Well, at least compared to Wolverine. But one way or another, Wolverine's story isn't just the story of a desecrated grave, it's the story of an unresolved problem with joint connections. If you like this video, subscribe to my channel, leave a like, comment, and don't forget to share it with your friends. See you next time.